Hey Night Owls. Welcome to BitBlitz Horror. I will read 3 horror stories in this video. This video will be about 1 hour of juicy horror stories, so sit back, relax, and listen closely. Story number 1. Amanda and the Harvesters. The night air was thick with fog as I stumbled through the darkened streets of Millbrook. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a desperate reminder that I was still alive, for now. I'm Amanda, 26 years old, and this wasn't how I imagined spending my Friday night. But here I was, running for my life from something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. It all started earlier that evening. I had just finished my shift at the local diner, exhausted but looking forward to a quiet night in. The walk home was familiar, a route I'd taken hundreds of times before. But tonight something felt off. The shadows seemed deeper, the silence more oppressive. I first noticed the footsteps when I turned onto Elm Street. At first, I thought nothing of it, probably just another late-night wanderer heading home. But as I quickened my pace, so did the footsteps behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I realized they were getting closer. I dared a glance over my shoulder, and my blood ran cold. In the dim glow of the streetlights, I saw a figure, tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its gaze boring into me. That's when I started to run. Now, as I raced through the empty streets, my lungs burning with each ragged breath, I could hear it gaining on me. The sound of its pursuit was unlike anything I'd ever heard before, a mix of heavy breathing and something that sounded almost like chittering. I turned down an alley, hoping to lose it in the maze of back streets. Big mistake. The alley ended in a chain-link fence, too high to climb quickly. I spun around, my back pressed against the cold metal, as the thing entered the alley. In the faint light, I could finally see it clearly, and I wished I couldn't. Its skin was pale and waxy, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. But it was the face that made me want to scream. Where there should have been eyes, there were only dark, empty sockets. Its mouth was a gaping maw filled with needle-like teeth. I closed my eyes, certain that this was the end. But then I heard something that made my eyes snap open, the sound of a car engine. Without thinking, I bolted past the creature, feeling its cold fingers graze my arm as I slipped by. I burst out of the alley onto the main street, waving my arms frantically at the approaching car. It screeched to a halt, and I yanked open the passenger door, throwing myself inside. "Drive!" I screamed at the startled driver, a middle-aged man with a bewildered expression. He opened his mouth to speak, but then his eyes widened as he looked past me. Without another word, he slammed on the gas. As we sped away, I risked a look back. The creature was standing in the middle of the road, its eyeless gaze fixed on our retreating car. Then, to my horror, it began to run after us, moving with impossible speed. "What the hell is that thing?" the driver yelled, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know," I gasped, my voice shaking. "Just please don't stop driving." For what felt like hours, we drove through the night, the creature always just behind us. No matter how fast we went, it kept pace, never tiring, never slowing. The driver, Tom, he told me his name was, kept glancing in the rearview mirror, his face growing paler each time. "We need to get help," Tom said, fumbling for his phone with one hand. "I'm calling the police." I nodded, too terrified to speak. As Tom made the call, I kept my eyes on the road behind us. The creature was still there, a dark shape in the distance, but it seemed to be falling behind. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. That hope was short-lived. As we rounded a bend in the road, our headlights illuminated a figure standing directly in our path. Tom swerved hard, the tires screeching as we careened off the road. The world spun, and then everything went black. I came to with the taste of blood in my mouth. The car was on its side, and Tom was slumped over the steering wheel, unmoving. Pain shot through my body as I tried to move, but I forced myself to focus. I had to get out. With trembling hands, I unbuckled my seatbelt and pushed open the door above me. As I crawled out onto the grass, I heard that familiar chittering sound. My head snapped up, and there it was, standing just a few yards away. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I was tired of running, tired of being afraid. With a scream of defiance, I grabbed a broken piece of the car's side mirror and held it out in front of me like a weapon. "What do you want from me?" I yelled, my voice hoarse. To my shock, the creature spoke. Its voice was like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "Your fear," it hissed. "Your delicious, intoxicating fear." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I stood my ground. "Well, you can't have it anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you." The creature tilted its head, almost curiously. "Lies," it whispered. "I can smell your fear. It radiates from you like heat." It took a step closer, and I swung the mirror shard wildly. "Stay back!" Suddenly, the night was pierced by the wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flashed in the distance, growing brighter by the second. The creature's head whipped around, and for the first time, it seemed uncertain. As the police cars came into view, the creature let out an inhuman shriek. It turned back to me, its eyeless sockets somehow conveying a promise. This wasn't over. Then, in a blink, it was gone, melting into the shadows of the forest beside the road. I collapsed to my knees, the mirror shard falling from my numb fingers. As the police surrounded me, asking questions I couldn't begin to answer, I stared into the darkness where the creature had vanished. The next few days passed in a blur. I was taken to the hospital, treated for minor injuries, and questioned endlessly by the police. Tom, thankfully, had survived the crash with only a concussion. But no matter how many times I told my story, I could see the disbelief in their eyes. They thought I was crazy, or that I'd been hallucinating from the trauma of the accident. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. And I knew, deep in my bones, that it wasn't over. A week after that night, I was back in my apartment, trying to piece my life back together. I'd taken time off work, unable to face the thought of walking home in the dark. My nights were plagued by nightmares, always ending with those empty eye sockets staring into my soul. It was on one of these sleepless nights that I heard it, a soft scratching at my window. My blood turned to ice as I slowly turned my head. There, pressed against the glass, was a pale, elongated hand. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only watch in horror as the window slowly began to slide open. The creature slithered into my room, its movements fluid and unnatural. It stood at the foot of my bed, looming over me, its mouth stretched in a grotesque parody of a smile. "Did you think it was over, Amanda?" it rasped. "Did you think you could escape me?" I found my voice then, a scream building in my throat. But before I could release it, the creature's hand shot out, covering my mouth. Its touch was ice cold and sent waves of revulsion through me. "Ship," it hissed. "We wouldn't want to wake the neighbors, would we? Not when we have so much to discuss." I tried to struggle, but my body felt heavy, unresponsive. The creature's empty sockets seemed to bore into me, and I felt my consciousness slipping away. When I came to, I was no longer in my bedroom. I was in a dark, damp place that smelled of earth and decay. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I realized with growing horror that I was in some kind of underground chamber. The walls were lined with strange, pulsating growths that gave off a sickly green light. In the center of the chamber stood the creature, but it wasn't alone. There were others like it, dozens of them, all turned to face me. "Welcome, Amanda," the creature said, its voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Welcome to our home." I tried to move, only to find that I was bound to some kind of stone altar. Panic rose in my throat as I realized the full extent of my situation. "What are you?" I managed to choke out. "What do you want with me?" The creature glided closer, its long fingers trailing along the edge of the altar. "We are the harvesters," it said. "We feed on fear, on the delicious terror of humans like yourself. And you, Amanda, you're special. Your fear is exquisite." The other creatures chittered in agreement, pressing closer. I could feel their hunger, their anticipation. "For centuries, we've lived in the shadows, taking what we needed to survive," the creature continued. "But times are changing. Humans are becoming harder to scare, their minds dulled by the horrors they create for themselves. We need to evolve, to find new ways to feed." A cold dread settled in my stomach as I began to understand where this was going. "And that's where you come in, my dear Amanda," the creature said, its lipless mouth stretching into a grin. "You're going to help us understand the modern human mind. You're going to be our bridge to a new era of fear." I wanted to refuse, to tell them they were insane, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself asking, "How?" The creature's grin widened. "By becoming one of us." Before I could react, it placed its cold hand on my forehead. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and I screamed as images flooded my mind. I saw the history of the harvesters, their origins and the primordial fears of early humans. I saw how they had shaped the nightmares of countless generations, feeding off the terror they inspired. And then I saw the future, a world where the harvesters walked openly among humans, using their newfound understanding to create fears more potent than ever before. I saw myself leading this new breed of harvesters, my human understanding combined with their ancient power. As the vision faded, I found myself changed. My skin had grown pale, my limbs elongated. But my eyes, I could still see. I was neither fully human nor fully harvester, but something in between. The creature, the one who had chased me, who had brought me here, bowed its head. "Rise, Amanda," it said. "Rise and take your place among us." As I stood, I felt a rush of power unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The fear that had consumed me for so long was gone, replaced by a hunger I knew could never be fully satisfied. Part of me wanted to resist, to cling to my humanity. But a larger part, a part that grew stronger with each passing moment, embraced this new existence. I had been prey, and now I was a predator. I turned to the assembled harvesters, my new brethren, and spoke with a voice that echoed with otherworldly power. "The hunt begins anew," I declared. "And this time, no one is safe." As we ascended to the world above, ready to usher in a new age of terror, I spared a final thought for the person I used to be. Amanda, the 26-year-old waitress, was gone. In her place stood something new, something terrifying. And somewhere, in a small corner of my transformed mind, a voice screamed in endless horror at what I had become. The night air felt different as we emerged from our underground lair. Colors seemed more vibrant, sounds more crisp, and I could sense the faint pulses of fear emanating from the sleeping town of Millbrook. It was intoxicating. My new brethren dispersed into the shadows, eager to begin their hunt. But I lingered, savoring this moment of transformation. The creature who had turned me, I now knew it as Vex, stood by my side. "What now?" I asked, my voice a haunting melody in the still night. Vex's lipless mouth curved into what I recognized as a smile. "Now, Amanda, you lead us into a new era. Your human memories, your understanding of modern fears, these are invaluable to us." I nodded, feeling the weight of this responsibility. As I gazed out at the town I once called home, a plan began to form in my mind. "We need to start small," I said. "Build the fear gradually." Over the next few weeks, Millbrook experienced a series of inexplicable events. Shadows moved when they shouldn't. Whispers echoed in empty rooms. Children woke screaming from nightmares they couldn't describe. And through it all, I watched, feeling the fear grow like a living thing. But it wasn't enough. The rational minds of adults quickly dismissed these occurrences, explaining them away with logic and reason. I realized we needed to do more. That's when I decided to pay a visit to my old workplace, the diner where I used to waitress. It was late, and only the night manager, Bill, was there, closing up. As I entered, the bell above the door chimed, and Bill looked up with a start. "I'm sorry, we're closed." His words died in his throat as he saw me. I knew what he was seeing, a twisted version of the Amanda he once knew, familiar yet terrifyingly alien. "Hello, Bill," I said, my voice echoing unnaturally in the empty diner. "It's been a while." Bill's fear was palpable, a delicious aroma that made my newfound hunger surge. But I held back, remembering my plan. This wasn't about feeding. It was about sowing the seeds of terror. "Eh, Amanda?" Bill stuttered, his eyes wide with disbelief and growing horror. What happened to you?" I glided closer, enjoying the way he flinched at my approach. "I've evolved, Bill. And soon, everyone in this town will understand the true meaning of fear." Before he could respond, I vanished, leaving him trembling and confused. It was a small encounter, but I knew its impact would be significant. Bill would tell others, and doubt would begin to creep into the minds of Millbrook's residents. As the days passed, more people reported seeing me, or rather, the thing I had become. I appeared in windows, reflected in mirrors, always just for a moment before vanishing. The town buzzed with rumors and theories, each more outlandish than the last, but it was time to escalate. One night, as the town slept, we harvesters moved through the streets, leaving our mark. People woke to find strange symbols carved into their doors, unearthly footprints in their gardens, and in some cases, messages written in an unknown language on their walls. The fear was growing, but it still wasn't enough. I knew we needed something bigger, something that would shatter the town's sense of security once and for all. That's when I thought of the Millbrook Fall Festival, an annual event that brought the entire town together. It would be the perfect stage for our grand reveal. As the festival night arrived, the town square was alive with lights, music, and laughter. Families strolled between booths, children ran with sparklers, and for a moment, the fear we had been cultivating seemed forgotten. But not for long. At the stroke of midnight, every light in the square went out simultaneously. In the sudden darkness, screams of surprise quickly turned to terror as the harvesters revealed themselves. Our pale forms glowed faintly in the moonlight as we moved among the panicking crowd. I stood on the stage where a band had been playing moments before, my elongated form towering over the microphone. As I began to speak, my voice boomed supernaturally across the square, silencing the chaos. "People of Millbrook," I intoned, "your world is about to change. We are the harvesters, and we have come to claim what is ours, your fear." The crowd stood frozen, a sea of terrified faces staring up at me. I could feel their fear washing over me in waves, more potent and satisfying than anything I had experienced before. "Some of you knew me as Amanda," I continued, "but that Amanda is gone. In her place stands the harbinger of a new age, an age where the boundary between nightmare and reality no longer exists." As if on cue, the other harvesters began to demonstrate their powers. Some shapes shifted into the deepest fears of those nearest to them, while others created illusions so terrifying that people fell to their knees, sobbing. I raised my arms, reveling in the crescendo of terror. "This is only the beginning," I declared. "From this night forward, Millbrook belongs to us. Your fear will sustain us, your nightmares will empower us, and there is nothing you can do to stop it." With those words, the harvesters and I vanished, leaving the town in a state of panicked disarray. As we retreated to our underground lair, I could still feel the aftershocks of fear rippling through the town above. Vex approached me, its eyeless face somehow conveying approval. "You have done well, Amanda," it said. "The fear you have cultivated is beyond our wildest expectations. I nodded, feeling a sense of pride in my accomplishments. But as I looked at my transformed hands, a small voice in the back of my mind, a remnant of my humanity, whispered in horror at what I had become and what I had done. I quickly silenced that voice. There was no room for doubt or regret in this new existence. I was no longer Amanda, the 26-year-old waitress who had run in terror through the streets of Millbrook. I was something far greater and far more terrifying. As the first light of dawn broke over Millbrook, I knew that the town would never be the same. The age of the harvesters had begun, and with it, a new era of fear that would spread far beyond the borders of this small town. And I, once the hunted, now the hunter, would lead the way into this dark new world. The end. Story number 2. The Howling Darkness. Diana shivered as she pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The wind outside howled with an unnatural ferocity, rattling the windows of the old cabin. Josh sat across from her, his face illuminated by the flickering candlelight, casting eerie shadows on the walls. "How long has it been since the power went out?" Diana asked, her voice barely audible over the storm's rage. Josh glanced at his watch, squinting in the dim light. "Almost 6 hours now. This blizzard shows no signs of letting up." They had come to the remote cabin for a weekend getaway, a chance to escape the city and enjoy the serene beauty of the mountains. But Mother Nature had other plans. The storm hit suddenly and with unexpected intensity, cutting off their power and leaving them isolated in the heart of the wilderness. As another gust of wind shook the cabin, Diana couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The storm felt alive somehow, malevolent. "Josh," she whispered, "do you hear that?" He leaned forward, straining to listen. "Hear what?" "That sound. Like something's out there. Something big." Josh frowned, about to dismiss her concerns when a low, guttural growl cut through the howling wind. It was unlike anything either of them had ever heard before, a sound that sent ice through their veins and made their hearts race. "What the hell was that?" Josh exclaimed, jumping to his feet. Diana joined him, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know, but it sounded close." They moved to the window, peering out into the swirling snow. At first, they saw nothing but white, the blizzard obscuring everything beyond a few feet from the cabin. But then, a shadow moved in the darkness. Something massive, with glowing red eyes that pierced through the storm. "Oh my God!" Diana gasped, stumbling backward. "Josh, did you see that?" He nodded, his face pale. "We need to barricade the doors." Now, they rushed to action, pushing furniture against the cabin's entrance and windows. The old wood creaked under the strain, both from their efforts and the relentless assault of the storm outside. As they worked, the growling grew louder, closer. It was circling the cabin, testing for weaknesses. Diana's hands shook as she helped Josh wedge a heavy bookcase against the back door. "What is that thing?" she asked, her voice trembling. Josh shook his head. "I don't know, but it's not natural. No wolf should be that big." A thunderous impact shook the cabin, nearly knocking them off their feet. The creature had thrown itself against the wall, testing the structure's integrity. "It's trying to get in," Diana whispered, terror evident in her voice. Josh grabbed a fireplace poker, brandishing it like a weapon. "We won't let it. We'll fight if we have to." The night wore on, a terrifying dance of waiting and watching. The creature outside continued its assault, each impact more forceful than the last. Diana and Josh huddled together, their eyes never leaving the doors and windows, waiting for the inevitable breach. As the storm raged on, strange whispers began to fill the air. At first, Diana thought it was just the wind, but soon the whispers took on a more sinister tone. They spoke of ancient evils, of a hunger that could never be sated. "Josh," Diana said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you hear them? The voices?" He nodded slowly, his grip tightening on the poker. I hear them. But that's impossible. It's just the wind playing tricks on us. But deep down, they both knew it wasn't just the wind. Something truly evil had found them, trapped them in this isolated cabin in the heart of a supernatural storm. Hours passed, each moment stretching into an eternity of fear and anticipation. The creature outside seemed tireless, its attacks growing more frenzied with each passing minute. The cabin groaned under the assault, old timbers creaking ominously. As dawn approached, the storm began to subside, but the danger only intensified. In the growing light, they caught glimpses of their tormentor through gaps in the barricaded windows. It was a wolf, but unlike any they had ever seen or imagined. Its fur was midnight black, matted with ice and snow, but it was the size that truly terrified them. The beast stood taller than a man, with muscles rippling beneath its shaggy coat, and its eyes, those glowing red orbs that seemed to burn with an otherworldly intelligence and malice. "We can't stay here," Josh said, his voice hoarse from hours of tense silence. "We need to make a run for the car." Diana looked at him in disbelief. "Are you insane? That thing will tear us apart before we make it 10 feet. We don't have a choice," he argued. "The cabin won't hold much longer. It's our only chance." As if to emphasize his point, another powerful impact shook the structure, sending dust and splinters raining down from the ceiling. With trembling hands, they gathered what supplies they could: flashlights, Josh's hunting knife, and a flare gun they found in an emergency kit. The car keys felt impossibly heavy in Josh's pocket, a lifeline to safety that seemed hopelessly out of reach. "On 3, Josh said, his hand on the door. "We run straight for the car. Don't look back, no matter what. Ready?" Diana nodded, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. 1, 2, 3. They burst out of the cabin, immediately assaulted by the biting cold and remnants of the storm. Snow crunched under their feet as they sprinted towards the car, barely visible under a thick blanket of white. Behind them, a bone-chilling howl split the air. The demon wolf had spotted its prey. Diana risked a glance over her shoulder and immediately wished she hadn't. The beast was bearing down on them with impossible speed, its massive paws eating up the distance between them. "Keep running!" Josh yelled, fumbling for the car keys. They reached the vehicle just as the wolf lunged. Josh shoved Diana towards the passenger side, then turned to face the monster, brandishing the fireplace poker like a spear. The collision was devastating. The wolf's massive body slammed into Josh, sending him flying into a snowbank. Diana screamed, watching in horror as the beast loomed over her boyfriend's prone form. Without thinking, she raised the flare gun and fired. The bright red flare struck the wolf in its side, igniting its fur. The creature howled in pain and fury, momentarily distracted from its prey. Diana seized the opportunity, rushing to Josh's side and helping him to his feet. Together, they scrambled into the car, slamming the doors shut just as the wolf recovered and charged once more. The engine sputtered to life, tires spinning in the deep snow as Josh floored the accelerator. The wolf slammed into the side of the car, nearly tipping it over. Claws screeched against metal as the beast tried to tear its way inside. Slowly, agonizingly, the car began to move. Diana looked out the rear window, watching in disbelief as the demon wolf kept pace, its red eyes locked on them with murderous intent. "It's still coming!" she shouted. Josh pushed the car harder, willing it to go faster through the treacherous conditions. The wolf's attacks grew more frenzied, each impact threatening to send them careening off the narrow mountain road. As they rounded a bend, Diana spotted something ahead, a bridge spanning a deep ravine. An idea formed in her mind, desperate and dangerous. "Josh, the bridge! We need to trap it!" He nodded, understanding her plan without words. As they approached the bridge, Josh slammed on the brakes, sending the car into a controlled skid. The wolf, unable to stop its momentum, shot past them onto the bridge. In one fluid motion, Josh threw the car into reverse, then accelerated forward again, ramming into the wolf with all the force he could muster. The impact sent the creature crashing through the bridge's railing and over the edge. A final, furious howl echoed through the mountains as the demon wolf plummeted into the icy river below. For a long moment, Diana and Josh sat in stunned silence, their ragged breathing the only sound. Finally, Josh turned to her, his face a mix of relief and lingering fear. Is it over?" Diana peered out the window, scanning the snowy landscape. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie calm. There was no sign of the monstrous wolf. "I think so," she said, though uncertainty lingered in her voice. They drove in silence back to the main road, both lost in their own thoughts about the nightmare they had endured. As civilization came into view, Diana felt a weight lift from her shoulders. They had survived, against all odds. But as Josh pulled into a gas station to refuel, Diana's eyes were drawn to a newspaper stand. The headline made her blood run cold. "Serial killer escapes asylum during blizzard." Beneath the headline was a photo that sent shivers down her spine, a man with wild eyes and a wolfish grin. The same eyes she had seen glowing red in the storm. "Josh," she called out, her voice shaking. "I don't think it's over." "Not by a long shot." As if in response, a distant howl echoed from the mountains, a chilling reminder that some nightmares don't end when the sun rises. The demon wolf was still out there, waiting for its next opportunity to strike. Diana and Josh exchanged a look of grim determination. They had survived one encounter with this supernatural evil, but they knew in their hearts that their ordeal was far from over. The real battle had only just begun, the unending nightmare. Diana's hands trembled as she showed Josh the newspaper. His face paled, the realization of their ongoing nightmare sinking in. They couldn't go back to their normal lives, not with the knowledge that the demon wolf, or whatever it truly was, still roamed free. "We need to tell someone," Josh said, his voice low and urgent. "The police, the FBI, anyone who'll listen." Diana shook her head. "Who'd believe us? We'd sound insane." They decided to head to the nearest town, hoping to find some answers or at least a safe place to regroup. As they drove, the radio crackled to life, interrupting the tense silence with an emergency broadcast. "Attention all residents of Blackwood County. A dangerous fugitive is at large. Lock your doors and windows. Do not approach." The description matched the man in the newspaper, but Diana and Josh knew the truth was far more terrifying than any human criminal. Night was falling as they reached the small town of Millbrook. The streets were eerily empty, with most businesses closed and houses dark. They found a small motel on the outskirts of town and checked in, using cash to avoid leaving a trail. In their room, Diana paced nervously while Josh searched the internet for any information about their supernatural attacker. "Look at this," he said, turning the laptop screen towards her. "There are legends in this area about a creature called the Skinwalker. A shapeshifter that can take the form of animals or humans." Diana shuddered. "You think that's what we're dealing with?" Before Josh could answer, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night air. They rushed to the window, peering out into the darkness. In the parking lot below, they saw a figure hunched over a prone body. As they watched in horror, the figure began to change, its human form twisting and contorting into something monstrous. "Oh God!" Diana whispered. "It found us." They grabbed their meager belongings and fled the room, racing down the back stairs of the motel. As they reached the bottom, they heard heavy footsteps above them, accompanied by that familiar, bone-chilling growl. They ran into the woods behind the motel, the sound of pursuit close behind. The forest was dark and treacherous, roots and branches seeming to reach out to trip them at every step. Diana's lungs burned as she pushed herself to keep pace with Josh. Suddenly, Josh stumbled, crying out in pain as he fell. Diana turned back, her heart in her throat as she saw the demon wolf emerging from the shadows, its red eyes fixed on Josh's prone form. In that moment, something inside Diana snapped. Fear gave way to a fierce determination. She wouldn't let this monster take someone she loved. Grabbing a heavy branch from the ground, Diana charged at the creature, swinging with all her might. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, but it was enough to stagger the beast, giving Josh time to scramble to his feet. The wolf snarled, its attention now fully on Diana. She backed away slowly, branch held out like a shield. "Run, Josh!" she shouted. "I'll hold it off." But Josh didn't run. Instead, he picked up a rock and hurled it at the creature's head. "Hey, ugly! Over here!" The wolf's head snapped towards Josh, giving Diana an opening. She swung the branch again, catching the beast across its snout. It yelped in pain and fury, backing away slightly. For a brief moment, Diana thought they might have a chance. But then the wolf's form began to shift again, melting and reforming into the shape of a man. The same man from the newspaper photo. He grinned at them, a horrifying mixture of human intelligence and bestial hunger in his eyes. "Clever prey," he said, his voice a guttural growl. "But you can't run forever." As if summoned by his words, more howls echoed through the forest. Diana's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. He wasn't alone. "Josh," she whispered, "we need to go." Now, they turned and ran deeper into the woods, the sound of multiple pursuers close behind. The forest seemed to come alive around them, branches whipping at their faces and roots threatening to trip them at every step. As they ran, Diana's mind raced. How could they fight something that could change its shape at will? How many of these creatures were there? And most importantly, how could they possibly hope to survive? Their flight led them to the edge of a cliff overlooking a raging river below. The same river, Diana realized with a start, where they thought they had defeated the creature before. "We're trapped," Josh panted, looking around frantically for an escape route. The howls were getting closer. Diana could see shapes moving in the darkness between the trees, red eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. In that moment of desperation, an idea struck her. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was their only chance. "Josh," she said, gripping his hand tightly. "Do you trust me?" He looked at her, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Always." As the first of the wolf creatures burst from the tree-line, Diana and Josh turned and leaped off the cliff, plunging into the icy waters below. The shock of the cold water nearly knocked the breath from Diana's lungs. The current was strong, threatening to pull them under. But they clung to each other, fighting against the river's pull. Above them, on the cliff's edge, they could see the silhouettes of their pursuers. For a moment, Diana thought they might jump in after them. But instead, the creatures melted back into the shadows of the forest, their howls fading into the distance. Diana and Josh struggled to the riverbank, collapsing on the rocky shore, gasping for breath. They were alive, but for how long? As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of their situation set in. They were lost in the wilderness, pursued by creatures they barely understood, with no help in sight. "What do we do now?" Josh asked, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Diana looked up at the star-filled sky, a grim determination settling over her. "We fight back," she said. "We find out what these things are, where they came from, and we stop them." Josh nodded, squeezing her hand. Together, as they sat there, catching their breath and planning their next move, either of them noticed a pair of red eyes watching them from the shadows across the river. The hunt wasn't over. It had only just begun. The demon wolf and its pack were patient. They could wait, biding their time until their prey let their guard down. And when that moment came, they would strike, bringing an end to this game of cat and mouse once and for all. But Diana and Josh were no longer just prey. They were survivors, and they were determined to put an end to this nightmare, no matter the cost. The battle between human resilience and supernatural evil was far from over, and the forests of Blackwood County would bear witness to a conflict unlike any seen before. As the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Diana and Josh set off into the unknown, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. The Demon Wolf's howl echoed in the distance, a chilling reminder that in this deadly game, there could be only one winner. The end. Story number 3. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when Martin's rusty pickup truck rattled to a stop at the end of my driveway. I hefted my fishing gear into the bed, careful not to disturb the cooler full of beer and sandwiches we'd packed the night before. As I climbed into the passenger seat, the familiar scent of old leather and pine air freshener filled my nostrils. "Ready for some trophy base, Eli?" Martin grinned, his weathered face crinkling at the corners of his eyes. I nodded, suppressing a yawn. "Let's hope they're biting today." We set off down the winding country roads, the early morning mist still clinging to the fields on either side. The drive to Lake Whisper was about an hour, plenty of time for us to catch up and plan our strategy for the day. "I heard old man Jenkins caught a monster last week," Martin said, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "Reckon it was near 20 pounds, I whistled low. "That'd be a record for sure." "Where'd he hook it?" "Claims it was in that cove near the abandoned camp. You know, the one we always avoided 'cause of the snags?" A chill ran down my spine, though I couldn't say why. "Maybe we should give it a try today." Martin's eyes lit up. "Now you're talking!" "I brought some new lures that might just do the trick." As we neared the lake, the mist grew thicker, obscuring the road ahead. Martin slowed the truck, peering intently through the windshield. The trees on either side seemed to loom closer, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. "Damn fog," Martin muttered. "Never seen it this bad before." I leaned forward, trying to make out the familiar landmarks that would tell us we were close to the boat launch. But everything looked different, shrouded in that unnatural haze. Suddenly, Martin slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt, and I braced myself against the dashboard. "What the hell?" I gasped. There, in the middle of the road, stood a figure. It was hard to make out details through the mist, but it looked like an old man, his clothes tattered and hanging loose on his frame. He didn't move, didn't even seem to react to our near collision. Martin rolled down his window. "Hey, mister! You alright?" No response. The figure just stood there, silent and still. An uneasy feeling settled in my gut. "Maybe we should turn back, Martin. This doesn't feel right." But Martin was already opening his door. "Nah, he probably needs help. Can't leave an old-timer stranded out here." I wanted to protest, to tell Martin to get back in the truck and floor it. But I found myself following him out onto the road, my legs moving of their own accord. As we approached the figure, the mist seemed to part around him. I could see his face now, wrinkled and weathered like old leather. His eyes were milky white, unseeing, yet I felt as if he was staring right through me. "Sir?" Martin's voice wavered slightly. "Do you need assistance?" The old man's mouth opened, revealing blackened gums and rotting teeth. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel being crushed underfoot. "The lake hungers," he rasped. "It will feast today." Before either of us could react, the mist swirled and thickened. In the blink of an eye, the old man vanished, leaving Martin and me alone on the empty road. We stood there for a moment, frozen in disbelief. Martin was the first to break the silence. "Well, that was something," he chuckled nervously. "Guess the old-timer's a few sandwiches short of a picnic, huh?" I couldn't shake the dread that had settled over me. "Martin, maybe we should head back. This doesn't feel right." He clapped me on the shoulder, his forced bravado not quite reaching his eyes. "Come on, Eli. We've come this far. No point in letting some crazy old coot ruin our fishing trip." Against my better judgment, I nodded. We climbed back into the truck and continued on our way. The mist began to thin as we approached the lake, revealing the familiar boat launch, and the glassy surface of Lake Whisper beyond. As we unloaded our gear and prepared the small aluminum boat, I couldn't shake the old man's words from my mind. The lake hungers. It will feast today. What did that even mean? We pushed off from shore, the quiet purr of the electric motor the only sound breaking the eerie stillness. Martin steered us towards the cove near the abandoned camp, his excitement seemingly renewed now that we were on the water. "I've got a good feeling about this spot," he said, cutting the motor as we drifted into the cove. "Pass me that new lure, will you?" I rummaged through the tackle box, selecting a garish purple and green creature bait that Martin had been raving about. As I handed it over, I noticed something odd about the water around us. It seemed darker than usual, almost opaque. Martin cast his line, the lure landing with a soft plop near a fallen tree. He began to reel in slowly, the rod tip twitching as the lure danced through the water. Suddenly, his rod bent double. Martin let out a whoop of excitement. "Fish on! And it's a big one!" I grabbed the net, ready to help land what might be the catch of a lifetime. But as Martin struggled with his unseen opponent, a sense of unease crept over me. Something wasn't right. The boat began to spin slowly, as if caught in a gentle whirlpool. Martin didn't seem to notice, focused entirely on his fight with the fish. I peered over the side, trying to catch a glimpse of our quarry. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a fish on the end of Martin's line. It was a hand. A pale, bloated human hand, its fingers wrapped tightly around the lure. "Martin!" I shouted. "Cut the line! We need to get out of here now," but it was too late. With a tremendous heave, Martin yanked his rod up. Instead of a trophy base breaching the surface, a head emerged from the dark water. Its flesh was gray and waterlogged, its eyes milky and unseeing, just like the old man on the road. Martin screamed, dropping his rod. The thing in the water lunged forward, its dead hands grasping the side of our boat. More shapes were surfacing now, surrounding us. Dozens of them, maybe more, all in various states of decay. The boat rocked violently as the creatures tried to climb aboard. I frantically searched for something, anything to use as a weapon. My hands closed around an oar, and I swung it wildly, connecting with a rotting skull that exploded on impact. "Start the motor!" I yelled to Martin, who seemed frozen in terror. He snapped out of his daze and scrambled for the motor, yanking the cord with desperate strength. The engine sputtered once, twice, but wouldn't catch. A cold, clammy hand wrapped around my ankle. I looked down to see one of the things pulling itself up the side of the boat, its jaw working soundlessly as if trying to speak. I brought the oar down hard on its arm, feeling bones snap under the impact. The boat was taking on water now, listing dangerously to one side as more and more of the creatures pressed against it. Martin had given up on the motor and was now using the other oar to fend off our attackers. "We have to swim for it!" he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. I wanted to argue, to point out that we'd be easy prey in the water. But one look at our sinking boat told me we had no choice. With a deep breath, I dove over the side, away from the grasping hands of the dead. The water was shockingly cold, stealing the breath from my lungs. I surfaced, gasping, and saw Martin flailing nearby. The shore wasn't far, maybe 100 yards. We could make it if we swam hard enough. I struck out with powerful strokes, adrenaline lending me strength I didn't know I possessed. Martin was right behind me, his ragged breathing punctuated by occasional whimpers of fear. Something brushed against my leg, and I kicked out frantically, feeling my foot connect with something solid. I didn't look back, didn't want to see what horrors were pursuing us. I just swam, harder than I'd ever swum in my life. The shore was getting closer. 50 yards. 40. 30. My muscles were burning, my lungs screaming for air, but I didn't dare slow down. A strangled cry from behind made me falter. I turned to see Martin thrashing in the water, his eyes wide with terror. Something had him by the leg, dragging him under. "Martin!" I screamed, but it was useless. He disappeared beneath the dark surface with barely a ripple. Grief and guilt warred with self-preservation. I couldn't help him. I had to save myself. With a sob, I turned back to the shore and redoubled my efforts. My feet finally touched bottom, and I half swam, half stumbled onto the rocky beach. I collapsed on the ground, coughing and retching, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear. When I finally caught my breath and looked up, I froze. There, standing at the edge of the trees, was the old man from the road. He watched me with those milky eyes, his expression unreadable. "I told you," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the beach. "The lake hungers. And it has feasted." I blinked, and he was gone. I was alone on the shore, the gentle lapping of waves the only sound breaking the silence. Martin was gone. Our boat was gone. And something told me that if I ever returned to this cursed lake, I'd find no trace of what had happened here. As I stumbled to my feet and began the long walk back to civilization, one thought kept repeating in my mind: the lake hungers. And it will never be satisfied. The trek back to the main road was a blur of exhaustion and terror. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent my heart racing, convinced that the horrors from the lake were pursuing me. But nothing emerged from the woods to drag me back to that watery grave. Nothing except the memories that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. I finally reached the highway as the sun was setting, my clothes still damp and clinging to my skin. A kind-hearted truck driver took pity on me, probably assuming I was some drunk who'd taken a swim in my clothes. I didn't correct him. How could I explain what had really happened? The next few days passed in a haze. I gave a statement to the local sheriff, spinning a tale of a boating accident. Martin had fallen overboard, I said, and I couldn't find him in the murky water. They dragged the lake but found nothing, no body, no boat, not even a scrap of the fishing gear we brought with us. I attended Martin's funeral a week later, a somber affair with an empty casket. His wife, Sarah, clung to my arm, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading as she asked me again and again if there was anything else I remembered, any clue to what had happened to her husband. I lied to her face, hating myself for it but knowing the truth would be far worse than uncertainty. Weeks turned into months. I couldn't sleep without seeing those pale, grasping hands reaching for me from the depths. I'd wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat, the phantom sensation of cold fingers wrapping around my ankles. I tried to move on, to forget. I threw myself into my work, avoided any body of water larger than a bathtub, and did my best to be there for Sarah and Martin's kids. But the memories wouldn't fade. And worse, a creeping suspicion began to grow in the back of my mind. It started with little things. The way the shower drain would gurgle ominously in the middle of the night. The damp spots that appeared on my ceiling even though there had been no rain. The faint smell of lake water that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Then came the dreams. Not the usual nightmares of what had happened, but something far more unsettling. In these dreams, I was underwater, drifting in an endless expanse of darkness. And there was Martin, his flesh pale and bloated, his eyes milky white. He would reach for me, his mouth working silently, trying to tell me something, but before I could understand, I'd wake up, gasping and clutching at my throat. 6 months after that fateful day at Lake Whisper, I found myself driving back there in the dead of night. I hadn't planned it, hadn't even realized where I was going until I saw the familiar turnoff. Part of me screamed to turn around, to flee as far as I could. But a stronger part, the part that had been gnawing at me all these months, urged me forward. The lake was still and black under the moonlight as I parked in the deserted lot. I walked to the shore, my feet crunching on the gravel, and stared out at the water. It looked so peaceful, so innocent. How could it hide such horrors beneath its surface? "I knew you'd come back." I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. There, emerging from the shadows of the trees, was the old man. He looked exactly as he had that day on the road, his tattered clothes hanging loose on his frame, his milky eyes fixed on me. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. "What is this place?" The old man smiled, revealing those blackened gums. "I am the keeper," he said simply. "And this is a hungry place." He took a step closer, and I fought the urge to back away. "The lake has tasted you now," he continued. "It won't let you go so easily." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean? You feel it, don't you?" The old man's voice was almost gentle now. "The pull. The whispers in the night. The lake wants you back, Eli. It wants to finish what it started." I shook my head, trying to deny his words even as I felt their truth resonating in my bones. "No. I escaped. I'm free of this place." The old man laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "No one escapes the lake. Not really. You might leave its shores, but it follows you. In your dreams, in the shadows of your mind. And sooner or later, it calls you back." As if in response to his words, I heard a splash from behind me. I turned, dreading what I might see. There, bobbing gently in the shallows, was Martin's head. His eyes, no longer milky but clear and accusing, stared directly at me. His mouth opened, and in a voice gargled by lake water he spoke. "Why did you leave me, Eli?" I stumbled backward, a scream caught in my throat. But my heel caught on a rock, and I fell, my head striking the ground hard. As consciousness faded, the last thing I saw was the old man standing over me, his expression almost pitying. "Welcome home," he said softly. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. I was in my bed, sheets tangled around my legs, the first light of dawn peeking through the curtains. It had all been a dream. A vivid, terrifying dream, but a dream nonetheless. Or so I thought, until I felt the damp spot on my pillow. I reached up to touch my hair and found it soaking wet. And there, clinging to my fingers, was a single strand of lakeweed. The lake had called me back once. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that it would call again. And next time, I might not have the strength to resist. As I sat there, shaking in the growing light of day, I realized a terrible truth. My fishing trip with Martin hadn't ended that day at Lake Whisper. In fact, it might never truly end. Because the lake hungers, and it is very, very patient. The end.